If you have blue eyes, here's something strange. Every single person on Earth who has them, all of them, got that trait from one person. One human being, born somewhere near the Black Sea, somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago. Not one ancestor in the "we all came from Africa" sense. One specific individual who carried one specific genetic accident. Before that person existed, there is a strong chance no human being had ever had blue eyes. Not one in the entire history of our species. So what happened? And why did a random glitch in one gene end up in an estimated hundreds of millions of people today?
Let's start with the baseline, because to understand how strange blue eyes are, you first have to see how deep brown eyes go. For most of human history, eyes were brown, overwhelmingly brown. That's still true today. Brown eyes are, by a huge margin, the most common eye color on the planet. Every early human, every ancestor you've ever had going back hundreds of thousands of years, almost certainly had brown eyes. There was no other option. The gene for anything else hadn't been written yet. Brown eyes are what you get when your iris produces a normal, healthy amount of a pigment called melanin, the same pigment that determines skin tone and hair color. More melanin in the iris, darker the eye. It's a straightforward biological default, and it's been the default for essentially all of human evolutionary history. Eye color isn't decorative either. Melanin in the eye helps protect against UV radiation, the same way it does in skin. So a fully pigmented brown iris isn't just common, it's the functional, protective version of a human eye. Which is exactly what makes blue eyes strange. Blue eyes aren't the result of a blue pigment. There is no blue pigment in the human eye at all. Blue eyes are what happens when melanin is largely absent. The blue you see is the same phenomenon that makes the sky blue, short wavelengths of light scattering off a low pigment iris. It's a structural color, not a chemical one. So blue eyes aren't a new kind of eye color. They're what you get when the machinery that makes brown eyes partially breaks. And partially breaks is putting it mildly, because when scientists actually went looking for the break, what they found didn't look anything like damage. In 2008, a team of researchers at the University of Copenhagen set out to answer a specific question. Is there a single genetic switch behind blue eyes, or many? They looked at a gene called OCA2. OCA2 sits right next to another gene called HERC2, and together, they're the main dial controlling how much melanin gets produced in your eyes, skin, and hair. Here's the twist. The mutation that causes blue eyes doesn't actually damage the OCA2 gene itself. It happens in a nearby control switch inside HERC2 that tells OCA2 when to turn on and how much melanin to make. Think of OCA2 as a factory that makes pigment, and this HERC2 switch as the power line running to it. The mutation doesn't blow up the factory, it just dims the power. The result? Melanin production in the iris drops dramatically. Not to zero, but low enough that the eye reads as blue instead of brown. And here's the part that made this discovery genuinely remarkable. When the researchers compared this mutation across blue-eyed people from Denmark, Turkey, and Jordan, populations thousands of kilometers apart, they all carried the exact same mutation. Not a similar one, the identical genetic sequence. That's the giveaway. If blue eyes had evolved independently in multiple populations, you'd expect different mutations doing similar jobs, the way, say, pale skin evolved through different genetic roots in Europe and East Asia. Instead, there's one shared genetic fingerprint, which means there was one shared ancestor. Somewhere, one person was born with this mutation. And everyone alive today with blue eyes can trace that specific stretch of DNA back to them. So who was this person? And when did they live? The estimates place the mutation at somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, most likely in the region around the Black Sea, an area that, at that point in history, was a crossroads for early farming populations moving into Europe. We don't know their name. We don't know what they looked like otherwise. We know almost nothing about them as an individual, except this one detail, preserved by accident in billions of descendants. Here's how a single mutation in one person turns into hundreds of millions of people thousands of years later. It isn't magic, it's math. This person had children. Some of those children carried the mutation and had children of their own. As early farming communities spread out of the Fertile Crescent and into Europe, small founding groups carried their genes with them into new, often isolated territory. In genetics, this is called a founder effect. When a small group settles a new area, whatever traits happen to be in that small group can become disproportionately common in everyone who descends from them, purely by chance, regardless of whether the trait does anything useful. It's the same mechanism behind isolated populations having unusually high rates of certain inherited conditions. Blue eyes just happen to be riding along. What we do know is that whatever eye color this person's parents had, this person was likely the first human being, or among the very first, to look genuinely different in a way that people around them could immediately see. Not taller, not stronger, not sick. Just a completely new eye color that had, as far as we can tell, never existed in a human face before. And it spread. Not because blue eyes gave anyone a survival advantage, there's no strong evidence that they do, but most likely through a mix of migration, founder effects, and possibly sexual selection. Humans, across cultures, tend to find novel and rare traits attractive. Thousands of years and countless generations later, that one dimmed genetic switch is now carried by an estimated hundreds of millions of people worldwide, heavily concentrated in Northern and Eastern Europe, where those same founder effects let the trait become common in some populations and stay rare in others. Here's the detail that tends to stop people. Two strangers with blue eyes, who have never met, who don't look alike, whose ancestors lived on opposite sides of a continent, are, in a very literal genetic sense, more closely related to each other on this one specific stretch of DNA than either of them is to a brown-eyed sibling. That's not true for almost anything else about a person. Height, face shape, personality, all shaped by huge numbers of genes and huge amounts of environment. But blue eyes trace back to one single identifiable event in one person at one point in time that never happened before and just happened once. Every blue eye you've ever looked into is, in a strange way, still looking at the world through that same original mutation. And if that's the kind of detail that gets stuck in your head, this channel is basically built out of them. Stick around, because the next one is even stranger. Brown eyes are the default humanity has run on for hundreds of thousands of years. Blue eyes are a single, traceable accident. One dimmer switch, flipped once, thousands of years ago, that quietly rewrote what a human face could look like. If you've got blue eyes, or green, or hazel, which are their own separate stories, you're carrying a piece of a genetic event that's older than written language. If you want the next one, the origin of green and hazel eyes, and why they're actually more complicated than blue, subscribe, because that's coming next on The First Light.